All right, so this is going to be a screen recording walking you through how to use your Chimera app to connect to and control your Chimera bike. Now, the first thing that you want to do before even turning on the app is just make sure that your Bluetooth is turned on. Once you've done that, open up the app, and more than likely, it's going to ask you for permission to access that Bluetooth. You should allow it, otherwise it's never going to be able to connect to your bike. Now, if you don't see that little request, you can always go into your device's settings and allow the app permission or give permission to the app to access the Bluetooth. That's actually the only permission that the app requires. It's a very simple app. Now, more than likely, once you've got the app opened, you've allowed that permission, it's going to give you this screen where it shows that it's looking for bikes. If you don't see that screen, you can always just click Add New at the bottom. Now, for those of you who don't yet have your Chimera, or you don't have a Chimera at all and you're just playing with the app to see how it works, you can always add a simulated Chimera. You can go ahead and name it and go to the main screen and play with the controls just to see how the app works and to use its functionality. But what we're going to do is go ahead and add an actual bike. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my Chimera. Chimeras always show up as just a generic e-bike. Unfortunately, that's just how the controller works. We have no control over that. But once you click the e-bike that you've just turned on, the Chimera, you can now name it in the app. So I am riding number 2 out of those first 100 titanium bikes. It's been my ride for over a year now. And you can see the app will save all the controller settings, even those settings that the app itself doesn't have any control over. Now, from this screen, that's almost all you can do. You can add as many chimeras as you like. You can add a simulated chimera. And then for any bike that's there, when it's connected, you can click it to go ahead and go to the main screen. But I do want to point out 2 other features that we have. If you drag your bike card to the left, you now have the option to rename it. Here, let's take that 0 off and just call it 2 out of 100. Or you can delete it. Now, we don't want to do that. Just wanted to show you that functionality. So let's click on the card, and that will bring us to our main screen where all of our controls and gauges are. Now, I'll start by walking you through the gauges. Over here on the left, we've got the battery gauge, and if you click the number, you can toggle between voltage and percentage. Now, we've gone to great pains to try to make that percentage number accurate, but ultimately those percentages are, a best approximation to how much juice you have left, and the voltage will always be a little more accurate of a number. But either way, they're going to give you a good idea of how much battery you have left in your bike. Now, over here on the right, we have temperature, and if you click on that number, you can toggle between Celsius and Fahrenheit. Note that this does not measure the temperature of the battery or of the controller. It just measures the temperature of the motor. The battery and the controller have their own thermal protection. So if the battery gets too hot, it will ramp down power and shut off. If the controller gets too hot, it will ramp down power and shut off. The motor does not have that on its own. It just has, a temperature sensor, and it's connected to the controller. And it's set up in such a way where the controller will ramp down the power on the motor and ultimately shut the motor off if it is getting too hot, if the signal from that sensor is showing that it is getting too hot. Now, you shouldn't normally have to worry about that at all. The motor tends not to run very hot. But if you happen to be, on a very hot day, you're in direct sunlight and you've got the bike full power and you're riding it hard, you might start to heat up that motor in such a way where you should keep an eye on the temperature. Although the controller will shut it off, it's just best to not even get in that territory. It's pretty hard to do, though. Now, when we go over here to the settings, you'll notice we've got two toggle switches, a battery toggle switch and a Hall sensor toggle switch. Now, for the battery, I'll save that towards the end because if we toggle it to 36 volts, it's going to give us an error because right now I have a 52 volt pack on my bike. I don't have a 36 volt. So if we try to switch, it's going to show us an error. I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. The Hall sensors, some of you are going to know exactly what those are. Others of you aren't. The way we've got the bike set up, the 3 internal Hall sensors inside the motor are only kicking in the very first moments when you hit the throttle, when you're at a dead stop or you're hardly rolling at all. You're almost completely stopped. Those Hall sensors help tell the controller exactly what position the rotor of your motor is in so that you can have a nice, smooth startup. That's essentially all they do in our system. Now, most of you, almost all of the time, are going to have your Hall sensors on. But Hall sensors can be a little finicky if you start hitting some hard landings or you're hitting lots of bumps. And every now and again, if you land hard, you're hitting some bumps, you're going to get a Hall sensor error, and it can, momentarily shut off the controller and, shut it back on, turn it back on. It's not a big deal, but if you start, if you're on some rough terrain or you're hitting some jumps and you're getting some Hall sensor errors, well, just shut them off. And I encourage those of you who, aren't even worried about that, just to try it. Because with the Hall sensors off, the only real difference is that you don't have as much of a smooth startup. But that's it. Other than that initial moment when you're trying to get off the line, the Hall sensors make really no difference whatsoever. I'll leave them on because, like I say, I want a smoother startup. On to the next 3 controls here: power level, throttle response, and power distribution. The power level slider we've got for the 52 volt setup goes from 3,800 watts all the way down to 500 watts. On the 36 volt setup, you can only go up to 3,000, but on the 52 volt setup, you can go to 3,800. You can use that slider, or you can just click and type in, any number you want within that range, and you'll be able to set the bike at that wattage. Ultimately, this slider, the overall power level, is going to primarily determine the amount of current that is being, the max amount of current, I should say, that is being pulled from the battery at any given moment. And that, in turn, is going to translate into your available torque. How much torque you have available is what that slider is going to do. Unless you go really low on the dial, it is not going to affect your top speed very much, but it will affect your torque. And as you can imagine, when you're at these higher settings, since you're drawing more current from the battery, you will draw that battery down quicker. So you won't have as much range, but you'll have tons of power. Skipping down to the power distribution, this is another slider that is going to affect how much current you're drawing from the battery. We use a process that's known as field weakening or flux weakening. And basically what that does is it dedicates a little bit of your available current that you pull from the battery towards what's called weakening the field to speed up the motor even faster. So it's a little sort of extra process to give you some extra speed. If you're at maximum flux, you're going to get, at least 35 mile per hour top speeds out of this 52 volt pack. With the 36 volt, you'll get more like 26 mile per hour top speeds. If you turn the flux down, you will have a little bit more available torque because you'll no longer be using that available current to dedicate to speed. It'll now be available to you to use for torque. But ultimately, your bike just won't pull quite as much power continuously as it would at those higher flux settings. So when you're lower on this power distribution dial, you actually get a little extra range as well. With the 52 volt pack at 0% flux, you're going to get around 28 miles per hour top speed. And like I say, at 25% flux, you get above 35 mile per hour top speed. With a 36 volt pack, it's more like 20 miles per hour down here on the lower end of the dial and 26 miles per hour at the higher end of the dial. So power level and power distribution, those are really the main controls over the feel of your bike, how powerful it is, how much torque it has, what kind of speed it has, and how much range it's going to get with the throttle. This last control has almost no effect on how much power you're pulling or how much drain you have on the battery. It's simply how responsive your bike is when you touch the throttle. I usually keep my bike somewhere between 200 to 300 milliseconds. That is very responsive. Anything under that is pretty extreme. At 50 milliseconds, if you breathe on that throttle, the wheel wants to spin at max speed, like as quick as it possibly can. It actually, you'll even hear an audible like pop as that chain pops in. So my advice is, even if you want the bike pretty responsive, keep it closer to 200. If you want a nice, more gradual throttle response, more similar to other e-bikes on the market, turn it down to 2000 milliseconds. Now you're still going to have way more power once the bike gets going, but it'll be more gradual. And in fact, when you first get on the bike, you might want to go for these lower settings. Now, those are all the adjustments that you can make. And what they mean, when you make these adjustments, all of that is going to go away when you turn your bike off and you turn it back on again, because you haven't saved them in the app and you haven't saved them to the bike, right? So let me give you an example. Let's turn this down to like 1800, turn this down to, I don't know, 1270. I'm going to turn off my bike. And what the app is going to do is, once it realizes it's lost connection, it's going to start looking for that connection again. So it's going to tell you it's trying to reconnect. I'll turn my bike back on and it will reconnect. Should only take a few moments. But what you'll notice is that, there we go, the dial's reset to the settings that I had previously, before I ever even opened the app. So there's a few things you need to know here. If you want to save your settings, you can save the settings to the app, so you can always go back to them, or you can save the settings to the bike, or you can do both. So I'm going to walk you through that process. In the upper right corner, you see these three lines. If you click that, you're going to get to these saved settings cards. Now, we've already got a couple in there for you to play with. And I'll note that this is also a slider, so you can either slide it out or you can click the button to pull it out. Either way, you can now save whatever settings you have. So let's do like a middle of the road kind of setting. And there's two ways I can save this. I can go over here and I can click the plus and name these settings. But my favorite way to do it is to do it from the main screen. If you actually click the name settings, it'll take you straight to this process of now naming your settings. So let's just call this like moderate settings. There we go. So I'm going to save those. And now anytime I open up the app and I connect this bike, I can always go over here and click the moderate settings and it'll load those settings for me. But that's only saving them in the app, right? And what's nifty about this is, if you have loaded your settings and you want to make a slight change to them, it'll tell you that you've modified them. And if you want, you can now save the modifications. I think that's a pretty cool feature. I know that many of you have other people riding the bike and they like different settings. And so you can save settings for each rider. And of course, there's some of you who do different riding scenarios. So sometimes, you're riding in the city, sometimes you're riding in the country. You can have all those settings waiting for you. But if you're like me, you've got a very specific setting that you like to have your bike set at stock. Like that's how you want it when you turn the bike on. You just want it like that most of the time. Now, of course, you can go over here and you can save those as like a new setting to load anytime you connect the bike. But a better thing to do, if those are the settings that you like, you should click this lightning button and flash the controller. When you do that, now when you turn the bike off and you turn it back on again, those settings will still be there. You have now saved the settings to the bike. And that's different from saving the settings to the app. So you've got both of those things that you can do. You can save the settings over here to the app. You can save them via the flash to your bike, or like we just did, you can do both. Now, the very last functionality that I want to mention on this app, if for some reason your settings get all wonky, or we ever need to load an update into the controller, down here, you pull this card out. At the very bottom of your Save Settings card, you can always restore the settings. Here we've got the settings that it saved when we first connected to the bike for the very first time. But we've also made sure to give you the most recent factory settings. And with every iteration of the app, if there's any change to our stock settings, we'll go ahead and have those available for you in the app. So it's a way you can also sort of update your controller. And note, these are the full controller settings. They're not just the settings we're playing with. They're the full controller settings, all the back-end stuff that you guys don't see. So the last thing that I wanted to show you on this app is what an error message looks like. So what I'll do right now is I'll go ahead and disconnect the throttle on my bike. And immediately I'm going to get an error message. You can click the exclamation point and it'll tell you that there's a throttle calibration issue. There you go. If you click send to support, the app is going to go ahead and collect all of your controller settings, and you can send that file to us via email for us to check, so we can get an idea of what's going on with your bike. Here, I'm going to reconnect that throttle, and you see immediately that error goes away. That's what an error looks like. So don't panic if you see one of those. You might have a hall sensor error, or maybe there's a wire loose. When it happens, just click that exclamation point, see what it is, and if it persists, go ahead and send us an email. If you happen to accidentally hit the battery switch here, all that happens is you get an error. Nothing's going to get messed up. You're just going to have an error and you're not going to be able to, ride the bike. So you can always switch back. And if you need to, you can reboot the app. The chances are you're going to be just fine. Usually you have to reboot it if you've accidentally switched the battery toggle. Okay, so that concludes the full tutorial about how to use the app and all of its functions. I hope you guys are loving your bikes, and I hope that you love this app. We're pretty proud of it. It is streamlined. It is simple. We think it gives you everything you need and nothing more.